Very excited of having an opportunity to discuss a lot of the work that has happened in the bank during the last few years, I would say, in terms of trying to not understand, have a little bit of a better understanding of how the crisis adjusted, how the crisis impacted welfare of people. Since the last quarter, in the last quarter of 2008, less than, 18 months ago, it seems like ages, growth predictions went from worrisome to cataclysmic, and in just a few months, it was clear that the crisis was going to hit really hard. And it was also clear that the prediction capacity of macroeconomists was really lousy, to say the least. During 2009, actually, while macroeconomists tried to adjust their predictions to each new piece of bad news, right? I don't know if some people have seen this graph of the prediction of growth in the US and in industrial economies. So the graph of the predictions was falling, basically showing how we just, basically revised our predictions to what else new we learned about how things were going. But while those predictions, the only thing that we're doing, we're just following that path, microeconomists, we started getting the question, what is going to be the impact of this huge shock on employment, on earnings, on welfare, on poverty? Who will be affected and how? And this was a different crisis, right, in the sense that it was not originating in the macro imbalances of the fiscal and external accounts of emerging economy. It was a crisis without inflation that was a typical characteristic of crisis during previous decades. So economists here in governments and here in the bank and in other international organizations were naturally pressured to come up with the scenarios of who, how, and by how much will be affected by the crisis. In part, it was critical in order to provide advice on design and implementations of policies responses, and it was also just a natural desire of knowing what's going to happen. But we macroeconomists are not good at predicting what's going to happen with poverty. Macroeconomists are used to that, but not us. Now, a typical easy response at the beginning was to dust and take from the shelf our growth poverty elasticities and try to infer potential poverty changes from the expected changes of growth. That is informative, but we know that for a given growth, there is a point estimate of poverty changes, but a whole distribution of potential changes. And to add to the uncertainty, the macro forecasts were changing a long time. So really what we knew in terms of what's going to be happening with poverty was very small. And on the other hand, just trying to model and infer changes in poverty is not enough in order to shed light on the type of policy needed. What was the potential? Was the potential impact larger among the extreme poor? Was among the urban workers more integrated to the market and to tradable sectors? Among women working in labor-intensive tradable goods? Was the middle class going to be more affected than the poor? So all those were the questions that were lingering throughout last year here in the bank and elsewhere in the development community. And a critical constraint that we have to assess that was the lack of good high-frequency data. Only a few middle-income countries have surveys that can allow to monitor, for instance, at least employment and wages on the formal sector, like Mexico and Brazil. A few others can monitor, at least have annual surveys, right, that we could look at repeated cross-sections of the last few years. But many others, particularly low-income countries, even have only, household surveys with a lag of even 4 or 5 years. So our informational basis was and is very bad. And in that context, in several countries, rapid assessments based on small surveys were quickly implemented, and they were very useful in certain contexts. But obviously, the conditions to rapidly implement those type of quick assessments are not always in place and cannot be done in many countries. So an alternative approach, and this is what's going to be seen during this day today, was the use of microsimulation models, which essentially consists in simulating a set of sectoral shocks and create a new database, and comparing our previous and our simulated database, and from where try to infer what might happen with the whole income distribution. And these microsimulations exercises, that's the one that we're going to be presented today, allow us then to have better information both about aggregate poverty and inequality, but more importantly on the distributional impact. So what are the characteristics of the workers or people who are going to be more affected, and why? And one important point is that these microsimulation models, all these exercises in which we have engaged, are not models to predict what will happen, right? They predict what will happen if nothing is done, but precisely if they inform policies and things are done and the predictions turn out to be wrong, then that's good, right? That is a good outcome of this type of models. So one common thread of the work of the different teams that we will see today is that they are all illustrations of how microsimulation techniques can be applied to different types of shocks. In the specific the case of what we're going to be listening at today, price shocks, particularly food prices, and GDP shocks. So that's the common thread, how these microsimulation techniques have been used during the last year. The three presentations that we're going to hear in the first panel highlight the importance of moving beyond aggregate impacts and understanding precisely who along the income distribution is going to be hit. One pattern that seems to be arising, particularly when we talk about the macro, the impact of the financial crisis, is that the impacts of the crisis through the labor income channel were larger among the urban population, mostly, or we think is being larger, because actually the real data, we just don't know them. We just don't know it yet, right? We don't have too many 2009 surveys so that we can really know exactly what has happened. But it seems that these impacts were larger among the urban population, mostly linked to manufacturing, with services as a fallback sector in some cases. And another dimension of these same results is that the income seems that it has been falling more in the middle of the distribution, more than in the extremes of the distribution. That is why we see higher, with more frequency, people moving to lower deciles in the middle of the distribution, and not a lot, particularly in middle-income countries, not a lot among the extreme poor or among the richer. Hence, we do find some people in the middle of the distribution are falling. It's likely that we find impacts on poverty, but we find relatively small impacts in the aggregate income distribution indicators. In several countries, the impacts on poverty seems to be will be around the 1 point, except Mexico, which seems to be hit really strongly. But the truth is yet to be unfolded. Now, understanding these differences and impacts across the income distribution as well as across groups and spaces is critical in order to design effective policy responses. During the crisis, we all know already that existing social assistance and other programs targeted to the chronic poor were effective in providing relief. Several countries that had well-functioning CCTs already in place were able to expand them. But there seems to be a group of new poor whose characteristics we need to understand better. The three presentations we will be having in the first part of the morning discuss simulation-based results, and they are a result of work done here in the bank by teams from PREM and the Human Development Network. And this session covers a large fraction, but not all, the simulation-based work on impacts of the crisis undertaken by the World Bank teams during the last year and a half. The first two presentations will focus on the financial crisis. The first presentation by Carolina Sanchez and Ambar Narayan will provide an international overview using evidence from Bangladesh, Mexico, Philippines, and Poland, with a focus on common patterns across these four countries. A second presentation by Jesko, Henschel, and Ishan will provide more details on the impacts of the crisis in ECA, using evidence from Turkey and Latvia. And the third presentation by Ana Frutero will describe the impact of the food price crisis in Brazil and evaluates the effectiveness of government's policy response. Just want to mention that in the second part of today's morning, we're going to have a panel with Danny Leipziger, who is already here. He's our former boss of many people around this table, formerly a vice president for the PREM network and now in George Washington University. Mike Walton, probably boss of some people I previously before, and a long-time friend from, and now in Harvard Kennedy School, and living somewhere all over the world, in India, US, etc. And Ricardo Paes de Barros, who is a partner in crime in several projects here in the bank, and he is with IPEA in Brazil, and is one of the leading microeconomists for Latin America.